I think you pointed out in that testimony, and now the vast majority of food stamp recipients are not on forever.
Right.
And also anybody who has received food stamps, you are not buying lobster with food stamps. This is not. It is supplemental, and it is most food stamps. I mean, one of the critique that churches have that we have brought is that the food stamp limits have not risen with inflation, and we are not seeing people being able to meet the end of the month like they are with food stamp assistance. Many folks are not being able to feed them families that third and fourth week of the month.
Thank you for refreshing my memory.
They were trying to also lower the poverty level, I think, from 200% to 150, or whatever, however it goes backwards. It's hard to understand. But they were doing something with the poverty level percentage, which would have, at the time, knocked me off of benefits during the time when I was trying to recover from leaving the situation. And it took me 10 years to effectively recover from leaving that situation. I was homeless for several years. I lived at a domestic violence shelter and at Salvation Army. If I had been thrown, and during all of that time, during that homeless period, during the time when I was at these shelters, I still had my SNAP benefits, which meant that me and my kids sometimes would walk to the grocery store and we could buy prepared sandwiches, and we could buy chips, and we could buy pasta salad, and we could eat well regardless of where we were. And even in my city, there's some places that cook hot food and then they leave it cold. Like there'll be chicken and then it's cold, fried chicken that's cold, so you can take it and microwave it. So technically it's cold, so you can buy it with your EBT card. So like we would do stuff like that. Really thoughtful. So like we would do stuff like that. So if I hadn't had my EBT benefits during that time, we would have been completely destitute. So that was a big thing. And then even to recovering that poverty level, they tried to mess with once I started working and I still was able to keep some of those benefits. They kind of wean you off of them as you make more money. And I think also I testified that today I'm not a SNAP recipient. I make a livable wage. I pay 100% of my rent. And all of my bills, which now makes me a middle class person, so that's a new struggle.
Tom, say a little bit about how you and the association got involved and how you engaged with this bill.
Yeah, good question. And we definitely had this bill and some of the other ones from the past on our watch list for sure. But typically, the association wouldn't necessarily get involved in this type of bill. We would be looking more at legislation that would be aimed at the administrative part of the SNAP, or things that would put the retailer in a position as being the SNAP police. A good example of that is the picture ID proposals on the cards, or something like that, where and we're not in the business of being the SNAP police. We just want to receive, the benefits, provide food, and sell food, and that. But this bill was a lot different. And I remember the board meeting when we really had a good, frank discussion about, okay, what do we want to do here? Do we really want to engage on this and send out member alerts and get some calls going on it? And I remember the board members, at some point, they were just like, we can't just take food away from these people. I mean, it was more than the economics of running a grocery and accepting SNAP. It was, this is a lifeline for folks. And even some of our own employees are on SNAP because of the economic realities of running a grocery store. And especially small independent grocers, they're impacted the most in rural areas, the IGAs, the Save-A-Lots, those types of operations, more so than the chains, I think. So it was kind of a no-brainer for us. And just in terms of some numbers, just real roughly, if you take a store format footprint like an IGA or Save-A-Lot, I don't know how many square feet that is off the top of my head, but a typical small grocery store in a rural area, you're talking about a total revenue of $7, $8, $9 million. In some areas of the state, 40, 50, 60% of that revenue is from SNAP and EBT. So you're looking at $3-4 million of that total that would be potentially impacted for some denominator of that. So I mean, it's real money. And when the typical average profit margin in the grocery store is about 1 to 1.5%. Very, very, very slim margins. So it doesn't take a whole lot to upset the apple cart on that. So that's in a nutshell, I mean, how we got involved.
And could you address the fact that $7 million, $7 to $9 million, that's not profit, right? That's
that's revenue. That's
cost
sales.
of.
So then you got to factor in your transportation, your labor, your swipe fees on a credit card if we use that. The two biggest cost drivers right now in any retail operation are the cost of labor and swipe fees on the credit cards if you're using a card.
From the council point of view, one of the things that we talked about in our Justice Commission was the two sides of this, which is I think you really brought up an important point, which is the money that comes into SNAP doesn't go to the person and stay with the person. It's not going into a bank account.
Right.
It's going to your local grocery store. And if those folks don't have money, they're not going to another grocery store. That grocery store, that economic food system is directly impacted by not having resource flowing into it. The second thing that we got involved with is we heard from legislators, well, this is a church and our faith issue. Now, I live in a church world, right? But churches should feed people.
Yay.
Churches should feed people.
Hallelujah.
Right? And I'm all about that, right? I think church and faith-based feeding programs, we have a long history of that. Nobody would want to give that up. But let me just point out to you that for every meal in a food bank that we can give out, for every meal we can give out here, SNAP provides more than 9 meals, right? There's an economy of scale. If we were to divide the spending on the supplemental nutrition program across 350,000 faith communities in the country, every one of our faith communities would have to come up with $370,000 of food a year. Every church, every synagogue, every mosque, every little Pentecostal place on the side of the road, every single Baptist community would have to find $395,000 to do what we can do together as a well-minded citizenry, right? So one of the things that we've tried to educate on our side of things, we've tried to help educators who are thinking that this is a charity issue and said, no, this is a structural issue that involves everything from growers all the way to the folks who are receiving, but it also affects educators because children who don't get to eat well do not thrive. And elders who do not eat well consume enormous number of unnecessary medical that they shouldn't have to go through medical problems. Food turns out to be one of those basic necessities. I don't know if you knew this, because probably news to you. And when we fail to provide adequate resources for those things, then it's a bit of a domino, it's a bit of a house of cards, right? The local grocery fails, the whole community suffers. So we've looked at a number of different things. I guess, Kimmie, this might be a good question for you, and I know you work so closely with all the partners, but what is it that you think what is it that helped turn the tide a little bit on 367? Because it had a lot of momentum. I mean, this is policy wonk stuff, but, they put this in, they moved this House bill through, they put it in committees that don't usually hear it so that people didn't know where the committee meeting was. I mean, they weren't going to pass this bill. Tell me, how did you, how and other partners, how did you help us stop that?
Yeah. I think there's quite a few things that really contributed to stopping it. Some of it was built up over years of trying to combat bills like this. So there were some things that kind of worked in our advantage. I showed you guys earlier, we have been fighting bad SNAP bills for 5 years now. We are expecting them in the interim. We know they're coming, And then like Kent mentioned earlier with FGA, they are not from Kentucky. They were hired and staying at a hotel in Frankfurt to lobby, you know? So they came in with their talking points, with their regular...
Bad hair. Bad hair.
Bad hair. And as KFAN, we have been fighting this for so long that we reacted so quickly. We were able to kind of get ahead of that narrative and do that narrative shift. And that had a lot to do with this network, and I think it really took bringing in people who really took down the stereotypes. And I think farmers and agriculture had a big part in that. Like I mentioned earlier, I mean, we are a top agricultural state. We're made up of farmers. My family is generational farmers. You know, everybody I grew up with were farmers. And they have never wanted to combine those things with everything else that goes on in our state. They have not wanted to connect those dots, and I think we were able to not only bring farmers and agriculture to the forefront of what it means to eat our food here and where it goes, but as the network, we were able to bring in so many different people that normally do not talk about SNAP, and it was kind of jarring to them, I think. They were expecting the typical people, organizations that are always there, always testifying, the regular advocates that are always there, but we had farmers, we had grocery association, we had domestic violence survivors. These are people who don't normally come out and speak about these things, and KFAN has built that up over the years that we came together so fast. We were like, we know this drill, and we were able to kind of outsmart them, I think, because they are not familiar with how we work here, and they kind of got embarrassed later on.
Yeah. They were actually caught lying, and that was one of the things I think that made a real difference. The FGA representative was just fabricating stories, including one about how they had a millionaire who had $1 million in assets apply for SNAP and get it, haha. And even some of the senators who may or may not have been, their caucus was certainly in support of this bill, even some of them just said, now, you had a millionaire go apply for SNAP and one application got through, but that's why we should cut off SNAP benefits to 600,000 Kentuckians. That's why we should do that? Really? Well, sort of, I was like, kind of, maybe.
For all the conspiracy theorists, I'd say they put them up to it.
Yeah, the conspiracy theorists put them up to it. The good news is that Kimmie's right. I think there was this network and all of you in a lot of ways who called and made that makes a difference. I think the sad part is that we know that this is somehow a target of certain political interests. Even though this was primarily federal dollars, this is primarily money that supports Kentuckians to be able to live and grow and thrive and get over humps, as well as it's, we're continuing through the network to increase the access to locally grown foods for SNAP beneficiaries. This is going to come again. We already know it. So I guess the question I might have for each of you is like, what could we do? What are some ways that we could, as a network, or that people who are watching and listening might learn from you in terms of what can we do to help inoculate our process so that we can actually assure decent, viable food sources for folks?
Yeah.
We'll go here first, we'll just come down this way.
Well, I would always say that year-round base building and continuing to keep people informed about what's coming and what's happening, and not in a way that they're fear-mongered, right, but in a way that they're informed and empowered and aware. I know at KSET we're working to make our base building efforts year-round, and in a way that is not transactional, and where we're not just showing up during election periods, we're not just showing up right before legislative session, but that we're talking all year round, we're caring for them all year round, through various ways, right? Using our direct service organizations to provide those, to help meet those immediate needs, and then using our other organizations as entry points for people to be empowered to step up and give their testimony about how this is going to affect them. But I think a key part of this is continuing to keep the information coming, continuing to talk to people, and letting people know that, hey, this is a long-term target. They are going to keep doing this. They have been doing this. That was something that I learned coming in and testifying about the bill, was that this isn't the first time. They do this every session, and this is a target. And like Kent mentioned, they're going to keep doing it for whatever political reason. Doesn't make sense to us, but they have these long-term goals that we really don't see just yet, and then everything pops up. So I think that'll be important, is really keeping people informed and talking about this, and knowing that what they can do to empower themselves and what they can do to help this before it happens. Because I think the other side does a lot of good preemptive work, and I think we need to be more preemptive in thinking about what they're going to do and what their interests are in trying to stop that.
I agree. I think it's a lot of education and pushing back on the narrative too. You know, you mentioned the narrative, Ken. I think it's pretty interesting because the disinformation or misinformation campaign, part of it was, this is a bloated, huge government program. It's, you know, the majority of the Farm Bill expenditure goes to SNAP, EBT benefits. This is the only way to cut back on this from a government perspective, is to, you know, Congress won't do anything, so what do? They target the states, and they start that groundswell and then hope that Congress eventually changes it. But the narrative is, you know, this is a bloated program, people are gaming the system, everybody's on a benefit, they're not working, they're just sitting on their couch and eating
the EBT popcorn.
Eating whatever they want.
Yeah, eating the lobster.
And not even nutritious food. You know, they're just going and buying whatever they want. And, you know, whoever, you know, some of the bills in the past, they would target certain things. Well, sugary food shouldn't be eligible. It was eligibility standards is where they kind of started with it. Then they went to the fraud and abuse. And now they're just saying, well, those tactics haven't worked. Let's just blow up the system.
Right.
Crash it, completely
crash
crash
the ambulance.
And so, you know, pushing back on that narrative and using folks that have actually been beneficiaries of a system that helps feed people and keep their families healthy, you know, allows them to do the other things. Like I said before, you know, the work requirement's in there. Folks are working while they're on SNAP. It's an assistance program. It's not a welfare program. So I think just pushing back on that, we need to do a better job as an industry as well of you know, just telling that story, and that's hard to do. I mean, folks don't want to be in the limelight, or, you know, be highlighted or tell their personal things about their lives going on. But I think it's important for lawmakers to understand that they get into a bubble, and then, you know, and of course you all know we have super majorities in the House and the Senate right now in Kentucky of Republicans. Some are very, very, very on one side, some are more moderate. But the ones, you know, the MAGA Republicans, if you want to call them that, they want to stay loyal to their base, and so they grab these ideas and just run with it, hoping that it'll play to their base and help them get elected. And, you know, we had Speaker Pro Tem Meade, David Meade, supporting the bill. I think he had his own bill and then got behind this one as well. You know, you get folks in leadership and they drive the vote. So that makes it even harder to push back. But at the end of the day, you know, I remember the Senate committee there at the very last. They must have lied. They must have done something, because several of the members in that committee said, "I didn't like what you told me during our meeting, private meeting in my office." So whatever they told them in their offices really went the wrong way.
Yeah, rubbed the fur backwards.
And then, they were really mad. And I think they actually had the vote. The vote failed, which you do not see that very often in Frankfurt. Usually those committee chairs protect their members. So I don't know what was going on there, but that was a very rare moment in the General Assembly.
Yeah, remember the threat to bring it back? They
he also threatened to bring it back
That's right.
later. That's how embarrassed they were.
Yes.
And they were like, well, you know, because I remember one lady in particular looked at me and she said, I'm a survivor of domestic violence. And she said, I did not realize that this bill had that effect on domestic violence survivors. She said, so because of that, I vote against it. And another one said that, and the black man sitting up front, I don't know the people's names, I'm sorry. He was sitting up front, he winked at me at one point. While I was talking, he winked at me. But you could tell that they were mad in the chair. He said, I just want to say that this could be brought back up in session. We were like, session ends like tomorrow.
Yeah, you know.
And to get clear, what the question was what can we do?
Yeah, what do you think is helpful to, as
Yeah.
we look ahead as these bills keep coming?
Yeah, and I'll agree with what everybody said here, and I've said this a lot in my whole policy life legislative career, which is all the work happens in the interim.
Yes.
When session comes, you don't need to be worrying about all the other stuff. You need to be worrying about the immediate and responding and being ahead of that narrative. So all the work is done in the interim time. Building those relationships, keeping them educated, keeping the legislators up to date on what we're doing, really driving home that we are the resource here. We're the right ones. You know, we don't say that directly, but they've grown to trust us and our resources and our data, and we're very lucky for that. And another part of it also, along with the education and keeping people engaged, is who those people are. Those, you know, that's why KFAN is so unique, is because we have all these different parts of the food system who can come together and speak out. Yeah, and just really, really highlighting that, you know, SNAP brings so much money to our state through grocery stores, especially in rural areas, but I'm always going to lift up the farmer aspect. The SNAP programs there are programs offered to SNAP participants that allow them to spend more of their SNAP money. So it's just, and things like Kentucky Double Dollars, Margie, you can correct me, but I believe KDD has put about $3.75 million back into our local economy, and that's nothing to write off. $500,000, they can write us off. Even maybe $1 million, you know? But almost $4 million, you cannot write off that benefit to our economy and to our farmers. And with the narrative shift, I'll end really quickly, but with the narrative shift, what has happened, getting on the offense, not always being defense, and understanding their narrative, and I think coming back around, they want to control what they eat, sugary drinks. I feel like you should buy whatever you want, obviously. But these other programs, like Kentucky Double Dollars, are incentivizing our community members to buy healthy local foods, learn how to cook them, learn how to eat them, and those decisions will be made over and over and over again, and they will no longer want to buy the chips or the Mountain Dew or whatever because they're getting so much more in the other. So, yeah, getting ahead of that narrative, keeping in the off-season.
I want to say a word on this topic about, because a lot of us in the room aren't going to show up in front of a legislative committee. At least I hope not. God save you. But if you know, that's not maybe even the most effective place to do some of this work that you all three have really highlighted, that organizing in the behind the scenes. When you reach out for whatever way you might for your representatives, and they come for a tour of your facility, or you're telling them about the wonderful programs you're doing, you can always build that relationship with them in such a way that you help them have that better information. I think what we found out is that even some of the most, shall we say, committed conservative folks, when they found out they were being lied to, did not like that information they discovered. If they have good information, they're more likely to make better decisions. That's true of all of us, right? I think policy is a little bit like getting Taylor Swift concert tickets. You know, what you see depends on where you sit. And sometimes when you are sitting only one place, you don't know what somebody on the floor could be the experience they're having. And so helping your representatives, helping policymakers, and helping your participants, whoever they might be, whoever your constituency is, if they are voting, help them understand that their choices make a huge difference, right? 600,000 Kentuckians receive SNAP benefits. 600,000 votes would change the world. But by and large, our vote participation across all demographics in Kentucky is abysmal. It's abysmal, right? Every one of us needs to show up at the polls, but the reason people don't, they don't feel like they have information. So if any and all of us can be points of good information, points of connection, we can then help people have the ability to make their own informed choices. And they may choose the same person they've always chosen, but I want them to be doing that with the full and certain knowledge that their vote makes a difference and that the way that the policy unfolds can be affected. As a group, I just want to thank our participants up here. We're right on schedule. I don't want to thank each and every one of you, but I did want to, we have 2 minutes or so to open it up for questions from you all that you might want to ask any of our crowd, and I will just ask if you've got them. And yeah, Rosie.
My question is, if you're talking to someone, crazy uncle, I don't have one, but let's say I did.
Right. Hypothetical crazy uncle.
Socialism, communism, how do you respond to those types of comments? That's coming.
Right, fear mongering. You've got somebody who's locked into either a conspiracy theory or just really bad information.
I just happened to have traveled to Cuba in March and witnessed socialism firsthand. It is not the scary thing that propaganda has made it out to be. Socialism just means that everybody gets a share of the pie. And the reason why it's demonized is because rich people don't want to give up their money. And rich people have the power in capitalism. So capitalism is in the interest of rich people. And, you know, that's as simple as I could make it. I just would really try to, that the propaganda around socialism and communism in our country is really permeated deep. And it depends on especially which generation you come from. But that's a hard one. You can hit them with facts and they compartmentalize. You have an answer. Okay.
All right, bring it.
Yeah, sorry, Rosie, this is kind of how I come at. I completely agree with like capitalism, socialism isn't that bad. It's really not. But your crazy uncle does not want to hear that.
Right.
And coming from someone who is very from that area and speaks with Republicans often, who typically have that narrative, and it's really, there's 2 fronts on it, and it has to impact them personally. It has to be shown somewhere in their life where they have done something that is similar. And then to kind of, I don't want to say throw in their face socialist programs, but do they draw Social Security? Basically, health insurance Medicare, regular marketplaces or regular health insurance, public schools, and then not only that, but and not only those more obvious socialist programs, but pointing out. Like our regular health care that we have, that's basically small socialism too. Like we're all paying in a lot of money to this one, business, and they're basically trying to give us it's socialism in a way, So trying to show them that they are already participating in socialism and trying to directly connect any life experience that they've ever had with that. If they are older, did FDR impact them with the, New Deal? Did, just so many different things over the years, but they have to be personally impacted, and that's what I've noticed the most when it comes to trying to change those very set people who are scared of those things. They have to see it for themselves.
And I don't know if you found this to be true, but listen, there are just a lot of good people in Kentucky, Republicans and Democrats. There are folks who are fiscally conservative who don't want to starve children, right? There are people who want to vote, on a different kind of issue. And I think another way to approach people who are kind of locked in is to bring it right down to, hey, if you were $50 short at the end of the month and didn't have enough to feed your mom, your kids, whoever, would you take $50 from me? Because let me help you, right? This is us helping each other. This is not socialism so much as it is. This is helping your neighbor. And I think sometimes when we put it down to, it was one legislative conversation I had where a guy who, just like you talked about, Cinnamon, who had gone through a rough patch, he actually said in the committee, he says, I don't think many people of my colleagues here ever missed a meal in their life. He says, but I did.
Yes, I remember that.
I did.
That's my boy right
Yeah,
there.
he says, but I did, and I know how my parents suffered when they had to see us suffer. He says, he says, I don't think there's any way we can harm this Commonwealth by feeding our children.
Yes.
And and he was from a party that would not necessarily have supported that viewpoint, but his experience. Remember, what you see depends on where you sit, and helping people sit in a different place, or at least connect to the people who are sitting there. And government programs are terrible, except the ones that help me and my family. Right? So if we can connect it that way, I think that's good. Todd, I want to give you a chance too. Oh, okay. We got a little more time for questions. Yeah, second one.
Hi. So I recently relocated to Kentucky, so I'm still trying to figure out who's who and what the scene.
Oh, me too.
And so I'm just wondering, it kind of follows on what you were just saying, but who are the legislative champions for these programs, whether it's a legislator or their staff, or were there folks that helped you guys?
The question was, who are the legislative champions for good policy and future programs? And there are some, and there are a good number of them. That might be a great question for you guys that work there more than me.
Good question, girl.
Thank you.
I would say there's not a whole lot of, I don't know how to frame this, because we work with everyone. At CFA and KFAM, we are nonpartisan, and we have a super extra red majority state legislature, even with Andy Beshear as our governor. But there are really great Republicans to work with. Even though he's gone now, Senator Whitney Westerfield, who filed a omnibus bill. He is a very, very extremely pro-life Republican, but he created a whole bill that would help people who did decide to have a child have resources, universal pre-K, daycare, child center expansion, tax credits. He wanted to double fund the KDD program as well as the seniors, because seniors often take care of children. So there are great Republicans out there that really do care.
The Crown Act too. He helped with the Crown Act.
And the Crown Act, because he has adoptive.
Yes,
he has adoptive daughters, and so there are great Republicans out there who really do understand what is going on. I've spoken with other people who said, me and my family were on SNAP. I'm from this county, and we were on SNAP as a kid. So it really, you just got to talk to them. And it's really those personal relationships.
And figure out a way to help them save face too.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
That it's okay as a Republican in a certain district to help my fellow man.
And still be Republican.
And still be Republican.
Yeah. Still be hard.
And by and large, I think when you run for office, you want to do the right thing. I think all of them have that in their heart. They're trying to represent their constituency the best way that they know how, and then politics comes into it. But if you can kind of help them rise above that and just get on that level, I think that, and it's difficult, but it's doable.
I don't really do a lot of legislative work, but I went to high school with Whitney Westerfield, so if I want to talk to him, I have his number. He's okay. He's gotten better as he's gotten older.
Yeah, right here.
I just, as one of those physical conservatives that don't want to start children, I can tell you one of the things that I think we miss the mark sometimes because we don't say a lot about, we recognize the primary responsibility to feed children are their families and parents.
Yeah.
Like saying we're not wanting the government to take over feeding all those children, that we recognize that family responsibility. But if they don't have the means or the resources to do that, that's where the state needs to kick in.
Yeah.
And when I have talked to some Republicans, colleagues of mine, or I guess they're part of the same party, but anyway, when I've talked to them, the message that they don't hear when we go to talk to them is the fact that that's the family and the caregiver's responsibility to be feeding these children. We don't recognize, we don't say that we recognize that responsibility still lies with them. We're wanting to help those who cannot.
Assistance, that assistance, but not that take over part.
Right, and when you can get it, that we're not trying to nanny state the whole feeding of children or feeding of people by the government totally, that I think it went a little bit further with my messaging around House Bill 367 when I said we're not trying to just take over feeding everybody, but for those families, particularly for children, which is the standpoint that I represent, those families that don't have the means or the resources to do so, that's where this kicks in.
Yes,
We still recognize it's the primary responsibility.
No, absolutely, and I think that you're right. There's a crazy that happens when for legislators too, right? For them too, everything gets boiled down, or often it's easy to boil down, and you're just trying to trying to get through, and they're trying to get through, and they're reading 10,000 pages of bills and all that. And I think you make an excellent point, which is to say, broadening to see the forest, and not hyper-focusing on the trees is sometimes what we can really help each other do. Yeah, I don't know if that's
Well, you bring up a good point, and they try to simplify everything down to just this bill will solve this problem. They're looking for the magic bullet or whatever, right? And as we all know, life's more complicated than that. Policy is a lot more complicated than that, and programs are a lot more complicated than that. The other thing too is, this is a weird time because we're coming off the pandemic. There was so much money injected into the economy by Congress, right, with all the pandemic EBT money and child care money and this money and that money, and then the business organizations too, Kentucky Chamber in particular, has focused so much on our workforce participation rate in this state, which is very, very low right now. I mean, it's 61%, 58%, something like that. We're one of the lowest states as far as workforce participation rate. So as a legislator, you hear, well, what can we do to increase that workforce participation? Well, let's get people off these programs. They'll have to go to work. That's a simple solution, right? But it's more complicated.
Right, and it doesn't always work that way.
It doesn't always. No, it doesn't. Another question? Yeah, Lori.
You all, a couple of you mentioned data. What do you think are the data points that we need to be able to make our case?
Don't confuse them with the data.
Yeah.
Tell the story.
Yeah.
Well, then there's twofold to that, because you tell the story too, but don't also parade around victims in front of these people, because I think we have proven that they're moved sometimes by stories, but a lot of times you get into the cycle of bringing people forward to tell stories, and that doesn't move these people by itself either. So there has to be a combined effort of methods, because you also don't want to keep re-inflicting pain on the person that you're asking to tell the story, right?
Right.
So like I was saying, it took me 10 years to heal from where I was. There's no way in those 10 years I would ever sit in front of a legislative body and say anything. I wasn't prepared or healed for that. So I would just say that in all of this too, is that we don't get into that. But I also think that, what was your original question again?
About
Data. I was thinking, this whole time I've been thinking teachers, because when they were messing with that poverty level, then you eliminate teachers too in that. And then, they don't get paid enough as it is, and then you're going to re-burden them. So I think that will be an important demographic to look up in the future, and some data to look at is from the amount of money they make, this poverty level that they're trying to attack, and how many teachers would be knocked off of EBT benefits. Because I know when the pandemic hit, a lot of my teacher friends that never had EBT before got EBT, and they were just like, oh my God, I can breathe. I don't have to worry about this. So that's a good data point I would look to in the future.
And I don't want to downplay the data, it's important, but you've got to simplify it. But remember that for every data point you present, the opposition's got the wrong.
Yes.
And I know we have like no time, but I just want to address the data point too, because we do need to use data.
Yeah.
But I will agree with what he said here. I've been in meetings where I'm just spitting out the data because it's so great, right? And I've had legislators be like, I don't care about the data, I believe what's in front of me, which comes back to that personal impact.
Yes.
Then you gotta figure out the data that does personally impact them. If you're talking to a farmer, then it's like, $dollars put $3.75 million back into the economy and over $300,000 into the pockets of farmers, and that is, you have to slide them in there with the story, kind of. Make the data relatable and then try to tie it to a personal story. Don't make it overwhelming and come in there and be like, because I want to a lot because there's so much data, but they're not gonna receive it. You have to simplify it, like you said.
I think you've made some really great points, all of you, especially about, too much is too fast. But connecting, I think, it's always about connecting to what the interests, where you can meet the interests of the person you're talking to. And so if they, as you said, if they're a farmer, if they're a grocer, if they're concerned about bottom line, if they do have a history, I hope some of the best work we do is creating that personal relationship. There's a thing that happens is that a legislator, or and maybe it's all of us, right? We have one experience and we universalize that, right? Like I knew one person who had this problem, and now I'm going to make it statewide policy for 600,000 people.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And that we all have to resist that temptation. So, but it happens because we have a relationship, we have a story that we attach to. And so having people attached to good stories with good data that are different, even if they don't switch or change, at least showing that your anecdote isn't actually evidence, right? And I think that's been one of the things that I have tried to do is to break that cycle of anecdote does not equal evidence. Helping people say there's evidence here. That's a powerful story, and I'm sorry that happened to your friend, but that isn't actually the lived reality of the whole system. And let me tell you this story. That's maybe one way to do that. Great questions, you all. I know that the panelists will be around and we'll be able to have some conversation. We're about to get ready for lunch, but will you join me in thanking all of them for their hard work. Thank you all.